Hello, and welcome back to the Ninox Learning Channel by Nioxis. My name is Andy. I'm a Ninox programmer and trainer. And today we're going to be talking about a brand new topic, and it's one of my favorite, and that is role-based security. When we're building databases for multiple users, those different users may see different things. They may be able to access different tables full of data. Maybe they can see certain fields but not see others. That is role-based security. The ability to control what people see and what the users can do with what they see is a crucial part of the multi-user database design process. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. This is easy to do, but there's a lot of moving parts. So this class may be a little bit longer than some of our previous ones, but again, I'm going to go slowly. And if you build databases for other users, for multiple users, where different roles and different users need to have different levels of access, or what we call rights and privileges, then believe me, you're going to want to watch the entire video. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to begin at www.nioxis.com. We're going to be using two different resources in our class today: an Excel template and a Ninox database. If you go to www.nioxis.com, click on Login, and log in to the member portal. If you have a paid membership or a free membership, it doesn't matter. You'll be able to download both of these resources. You have to have a membership, but you can get a free one. It costs absolutely nothing, and everything is available to you for this class here today. The first thing you're going to want to do is go to nioxis.com and log in to the member portal. Once you're at the member portal, click on How To and select Create Role-Based Security. You'll first see a description of the process, as well as a detailed checklist of the 7 major steps you need to complete to engage a role-based security protocol. You'll be able to download the role-based security worksheet, the Excel spreadsheet that we're going to be using, and you'll be able to download an unlocked, fully available version of the database, the accounting system that we are using as a sample here today in our class. So if you'd like to download that now and follow along, or download it after the class, head over to www.nioxis, that's nioxus.com, download it for free, use it, enjoy it, and hopefully this will be a great learning tool for you. Now, what we're going to do today is first look at the core system. We have built a very, very basic, and I mean very basic, general accounting system. It consists of modules for accounts payable and accounts receivable, a payroll module, a general ledger chart of accounts, as well as our trial balance and our general ledger, which can produce our financial statements, and then finally a separate module for bank deposits, for bank receipts, for withdrawal slips, what we generically call cash management. This is the sample database we will be working with today. This is the sample database that you can download for free, unlocked at nioxis.com. Before we get into the database, however, let's talk about a few key terms. And those terms are rights and privileges. A right is the ability to see something. A privilege is the ability to manipulate what you can see. Now, in this class today, we're going to pretend to be 3 different users. And I'm going to ask you to direct your attention to the top right-hand corner of the screen, where right now we see in the orange circle the letter C. When we're logged into this screen, we are going to be an accounting clerk. When we're logged into the next screen and we see the purple letter M, we are an accounting system manager. And the third screen, where we see the orange V, we're going to be the VP, the Vice President of Finance. 3 different roles, each one having its own set of rights and privileges. And let's see how those rights and privileges manifest themselves at a high level. And then we'll take a deep dive into how we build this security protocol. When we are the accounting clerk, and again, note the C in the top right-hand corner, we only have rights to 2 modules, the payables module and the accounts receivable module. We have privileges within these modules. Privileges are the ability to add a new record, modify an existing record, view an existing record but not be able to change it, and finally delete an existing record. We have different sets of privileges within these 2 modules, but these are the only 2 modules where the accounting clerk has any rights, because these are the only 2 modules that the accounting clerk can see. Compare that to the accounting manager. Note the M in the top right-hand corner. In addition to payables and receivables, they also can see our payroll module and our one reporting module for the trial balance, and then the general ledger chart of accounts module. Compare that to the VP of Finance, and we see the V in the top right-hand corner. People, users who have the role VP of Finance have rights to everything. They can see everything from the general ledger and trial balance to payroll and our cash management, to the chart of accounts and our payables and receivables. They also, in addition to having all of those rights, have some system-wide privileges. For example, the accounting clerk can't import any data. The manager, while they have rights to different modules, can't import any data. But the VP, a VP can import data. If a vice president goes into the payables module, they can click on the icon to print a record or an invoice out of the payables module. But the clerk, going into the exact same module and the exact same record, note the printer icon is disabled, because the privilege of printing, even though they have the right to get into the module, and a module is a table. This is the payables table. Even though this role or users assigned to this role have the right to get into the table, they don't have the privilege of printing or exporting content from the table. Clerks, managers, VPs, all using the same system, all accessing the same tables, having a variety of rights and a variety of privileges within the tables to which they have those rights. This is a perfect example of role-based security. Who you are and the role you play within the organization determines what you can see and how you can interact with what you can see. That is role-based security. Let's now talk about the steps we go through to create a role-based security system, or the security protocols that deliver this ability to control what different users see and how they can interact with, or what privileges they have to manipulate what they can see. Step number 1, and there's a 4th identity, and that is the identity of the system administrator. The system administrator has the ability to see and do anything. And they also have something else very important. They have the red wrench. They have the ability, the system administrator can go in and not only work with the system, but they can go behind the scenes by clicking on the wrench and turning it red and work on the system. Note that the clerk, the manager, and the VP of Finance, irrespective of their rights and privileges, none of them, and I direct your attention to the top right-hand corner, none of them have the option of grabbing the red wrench. That is a right and a privilege reserved only for the system admin. Users work with the system. The administrator can work on the system. So for right now, in the next few minutes, we're going to be the system administrator. Step number 1 to defining your role-based security is to define the data model of the database itself. Now consider a database to be a house. And within the house, we have different rooms. Every room has a door. Every door has a lock. Role-based security is the process of determining who has the keys to which locks, which rooms can they get into. And once they're in a room, who has the right to manipulate what's in the room, to move things around, to edit what's there, to add new stuff or get rid of stuff that's in the room, and who has only the right to see what's in the room but not touch it or manipulate it, what we would call view-only rights. In this scenario, you don't start by installing the locks. You don't even start by putting up the doors. You start by building the house, putting up the walls, and defining the individual rooms. That's always step 1. In Ninox, as with a house, you cannot secure what doesn't exist. If we haven't first created the data table, it's not possible to secure the content of the data table. So step 1 is to build out our data model. And here we see the data model for our very basic sample accounting system. Again, a system you can download and access yourself at nioxis.com. We have modules or tables for payables and receivables, payroll, our 2 reporting modules, general ledger and trial balance, our cash management or banking module, and finally the chart of accounts and the account-based transactions. Again, this database is for sample purposes only for this class, but this will serve its purpose very nicely. But step 1, build your database. Architect the basic data model with the critical fields you need to secure. For example, in payroll, certain people can see payroll, other users don't have that right. And of the users that do have the right to see payroll, certain users have certain privileges that allow them to see certain things. Let's look at that. The accounting clerk, payroll doesn't even exist. They don't even have the right. The accounting manager, there's payroll. They can log into payroll. They can see employee IDs and names, the number of tax deductions, the account that this payroll posts to. They can even see when this employee's next performance review is scheduled to take place. But you have to be a VP of Finance to have the right to see payroll and the privilege of seeing how much people actually get paid. This is the exact same screen, the exact same record, and the exact same table. A manager can only see this, while the VP of Finance can see this financial information over here on the right. That is taking rights and privileges down to the field-based level. This is saying 2 people can get into this room. Here we see that the manager can walk through the door of the payroll room. And here we see that the VP of Finance also can walk through the door of the payroll room. But they have different privileges at the field level once they're in the room. So rights and privileges can exist at the table level, but also at the field level. which brings us to step number 2. If step number 1 was building the house, laying out the data model that defines the tables and the critical fields within those tables. So we then move on to step 2. Step 2 is defining the roles by table or module, and within the roles, assigning the rights, and for the roles that have certain rights, establishing their privileges. And then finally, defining the exceptions. Now, how do we define this? Well, remember I told you there's 2 assets that we're going to be working with today. The first one is this database. The second one is this spreadsheet. We have created this spreadsheet here at Nioxus and posted it exactly as you see it right here up onto our portal where you can download it for free. This is unlocked. You can change the names of the tables, the names of the roles. You can insert the names of the individual users assigned to each role. But we've laid out this template for you as a way to define at the most granular, detailed level the rights and privileges of your roles and users and the exceptions. So let's look at how this template works. First of all, every module consists of 4 columns. This is our chart of accounts module or table. The general ledger, trial balance, so on and so forth, all the way through cash management or our banking module. The reason we assign 4 columns per module is so we can define the 4 privileges: read, write, add new, delete, on a module by module basis. So we define our roles: the accounting clerk, the accounting manager, the VP of finance, and most companies would also have probably a controller. So we have different roles at the clerk, management, and executive level. Once we have defined all of our modules or our tables, as we see in row 1, and we have defined all of our roles in column A, then we go through and assign the rights and privileges per role. The accounting clerk has rights to see the chart of accounts, but they can only read it. They can look, they can't touch. Compare that to the accounts receivable module, where the accounting clerk can not only see it, they have that right, but they can read, edit, and add to what's already there. Compare that to our controller, who also has rights to the accounts receivable module, but they have one privilege that our clerk doesn't have: the privilege of being able to delete content out of AR or accounts payable AP. So we define the tables, we lay out the house, and we name the rooms. We define the roles. Roles are not the names of individual users. They are the part each user plays in the operation of the entity, the business, the church, the athletic team, the nonprofit, the corporation. The role is the identity you have as a member of the team. Then we assign the rights, which is the ability to access it, and the privileges on a table-by-table basis to the individual roles. And then step 2C. Remember, step 2 broke into 3 separate steps. Name out the data model, assign the rights and privileges, then note the exceptions. Let's look at some of these exceptions. We have 3 accounting clerks. Those 3 accounting clerks have absolutely no rights within the general ledger. So there's no reason really to define any exceptions because they have no rights. The general ledger doesn't even exist as far as their user experience is concerned. They do have the right, however, to see the trial balance. However, They can see everything. They can read the trial balance except for all payroll numbers. Compare the rights and privileges of an accounting clerk to a VP of finance, where the clerk has no rights or privileges within the GL. The VP of finance has the right to read, edit, and add. They can't delete transactions, but there are no exceptions on a user-by-user basis. The accounting manager, they can access the payroll module, where our clerk has no rights or privileges in payroll. The manager does. The manager has the right to see the payroll module and the privilege of reading, editing, and adding new records within the table. But there is an exclusion. On a user-by-user basis, accounting managers cannot see how much their coworkers get paid. Now, this template is one of hundreds of different designs that you can use. If you want to create your own, that's fantastic. If you don't have one and you aren't sure where to begin, download this template for free at the member portal at Nioxus, and this at least will give you a baseline starting point. But the important thing to remember is write it down. I don't care if you do it on a piece of note paper with a pen or pencil, in a spreadsheet. I don't care if you sketch it on the back of a napkin, but write it down. Role-based security, database security of any kind, is so important. You cannot afford to get it wrong. You cannot afford to have a breach or a compromise in your data. It's one thing to have a bug in your software or a defect in your code where math doesn't come out properly. That's bad enough. But that's not necessarily against the law. But a defect in your security protocol may allow someone to see content they were never supposed to see, and that could be a violation of laws within your state or even your country, noting HIPAA laws and Sarbanes-Oxley laws in the United States of America, and of course the GDPR laws in Europe. So there are severe and significant legal ramifications to how we define our security protocols. Get it right the first time. Go slow. Write it down. Sketch it out in a template that looks something like this. And make sure you account for every right, for every privilege, and for every exception for every named user. So that's the template, and that's step 2. Step 1, we built the database. Step 2, we defined the rights and privileges for people who could even get into the database in the first place. Let's now go in and see how we make it all work. Again, I am going to be, for this few moments, the system administrator with the red wrench, the administrative tools wrench, in my hand. The first thing we are going to do is define database-wide security. Remember, we established that we can have rights and privileges at a table level. And within a table, we can have rights and privileges within a field level. But tables exist within a database, and if you open up the administrative tools by grabbing your wrench, going to your desktop, and you click on security, there are 6 rights, 6 privileges that are available on an overall database level. The ability to see history, which in this case is limited to the administrator and the VP of finance. The ability to print data, which is limited to the administrator, the editor, the manager, and the VP. Accounting clerks cannot print. The ability to import or export data. Admins and VPs can import, only VPs can export. These are database level, role-based security definitions. And how do they manifest themselves? Well, here we see that only the admin and the VP can import data. So if I'm the clerk on the desktop, there's no import option. If I'm the manager on the desktop, there's no import option. If I'm the VP on my desktop, there's the button I click to import data. Similarly, a clerk does not have, and I'm going to go back to my desktop, as an administrator, back to security, a clerk does not have the ability to print. So when I log into the accounts receivable system, note the C in the top corner, I can see a record. I can see there's a button there to click, but it's grayed out, it's disabled, it can't work for me. If I'm the VP, I go into the same receivables module, the exact same record, and there I can click print and I can access the printing engine and the print format. I can produce PDFs out of the system. That is database level security. We've looked at how we use this security tab to define database level security. Let's now look at table level security. Remember, tables are rooms in our house, and a right is the ability to get into a room, to access or even know that that table exists. Here, the clerk only has rights to payables and receivables, where a manager can see payables and receivables plus the chart of accounts payroll and the trial balance. The VP can see everything. How do we make that work? Let's go back and grab our red wrench as a system administrator, and let's look at each table. The payable and receivables table, everyone has rights of some kind to those tables. So when we go into our table management window, we note that everyone can read, write, create, and delete records. Everyone has all of the rights and privileges to even know this table exists and to interact with, to interface with the content of the table. That's the way it reads right now. If you go back and remember, we defined on our template that while accounting clerks can read, write, and add, they can't delete. So we need to make a little change at the table level. As the system administrator, I can define that everyone can read, everyone can write, everyone can create, but only admins, editors, managers, and VPs can delete. The trash can that appears for each individual record, like the printer icon next to it, is going to be grayed out or disabled if you are a clerk, because a clerk does not have the right to delete records. These 4 boxes are how we define the rights and privileges for an individual table. Now let's compare this, the payables table and the receivables table is identical. Let's compare those 2 tables, and I'll save those changes. Let's compare them to the payroll table. Remember, the clerk doesn't even know it exists. The manager, he has rights to it, he knows it exists, but he can't see everything. As opposed to the VP, who knows it exists, can get into it, and can see everything, including the payroll numbers here on the right. How did we make that work? We are here at the desktop. We are the system administrator. We have that all-powerful wrench in our hand. And we go to the payroll module in administrative mode. Our wrench is glowing red. We bring up our table management window by selecting, and I did that rather quick, I'll do that again. Under the gear, we select Edit Fields. And notice we don't see the everyone that we saw a moment ago in our payables and receivables. Only the admin and the VP can read. Only the admin, the VP, and the manager can write. And only the admin, manager, and VP can delete. Who was left out of every single privilege? The clerk. Because the clerk has been given no privileges, the clerk cannot read the payroll. They cannot write or edit the payroll. They can't create records within the payroll. I'm going to disable that. And they can't delete records in the payroll. Because they have no privileges, by definition, there is no reason for them to even have the right. If you can't see anything or interact with anything in the room, there's no reason for you to even know the room exists. Therefore, by denying them all of the privileges, they don't even have the right to see that room, to see the payroll table. That leaves us with our manager, again, note the M for manager, and our VP of finance, note the V. Same table, same database, exact same payroll record, two different roles. The manager can see these 5 fields. The VP of finance can see all 10 fields. How did that work? Let's go back in as the administrator, into payroll, into the record, and let's either look at the individual fields by clicking on them on the screen and clicking on the red wrench, or you could also do this by selecting edit fields from the gear, or clicking on edit fields by clicking here in the bottom left-hand corner where it says edit fields. However you do it, go ahead and bring up the fields, and let's start with salary. The salary field has its own set of read and write privileges. We haven't changed those at all. What we did was we defined whether or not the field was even visible. Now think about this. You may have the right to read something. You may have the right or ability to write to it, to edit what's already there. But you're not going to be able to use either of those abilities if you can't even see it. The best security is invisibility. If it doesn't exist, you can't steal it. And as far as the clerk is concerned, payroll doesn't even exist. As far as the manager is concerned, this field, the salary field, doesn't even exist because of this very important piece of code. This function, the user function, takes no parameters and it returns the current user. This function, user role, and the R in role must be capitalized, takes one parameter. That one parameter is the identity of the current user. And this returns the role of the current user. And if the role of the current user is not equal to VP or admin, then this field will not be visible. At runtime, that looks like this. To the clerk, there is no room, there is no table that even has payroll data. To the manager, yes, we can see the room, we can get into the room, but we can only see 5 things that are in the room. To the VP of finance, we see the room, we can get into the room, and we can interact with everything in the room. This field, this salary field, became visible when the user is a VP. We may have an element on the payroll screen that is a button. And we click this button to process paychecks. If you can't see the table, if you don't have the right to get into this room, then of course by default you're never going to know this button exists. I only want my VP to process payroll. The manager who can get in, they can't process payroll. So just like I did with these fields, I am going to go into the parameters, the setup of this button. You will note this button does not have read or write parameters. Compare that to actual fields where you can define who can read and who can write. The only way to secure these types of objects, these layout objects, is using visibility or invisibility. If I go in to this button, the Process Paychecks button, and I make its visibility dependent on who you are by using this line of code, that's it. So only the VP can even see the button. Compare that to the manager who might be able to get into the room. They won't see the button. They can't process payroll. Now, I just made a mistake that every one of you will make 2 or 3 times. So let's talk about what happens when something disappears when it wasn't supposed to. I just went in and put an object on my screen, the Process Payroll button. And I specified explicitly that if you are not the VP, you will not be able to see that button. I'm not the VP. I am the administrator. The only way I could put that button on the screen in the first place was to be an administrator. The common mistake that I just made, and I made on purpose, that you will make a number of times, is to define the rights and privileges for all of the users, but you'll forget about yourself as the administrator. How do we fix this? Simply go into Edit Fields with administrative mode turned on. So here you have the red wrench in hand. Go to Edit Fields. There's the button. And remember to add that the VP can see it, or the admin can see it. By adding this "or" clause, there are 2 roles that can see the button: the VP and the system administrator. The system administrator always has the role ADMIN. This is a mistake. There is no default administrator with a capital A. Similarly, that is a mistake. Administrator. This is not a role that Ninox understands. This is how we identify ourselves as the administrators, the builders, the architects of this database. Now that I have added the "or" clause and added myself as an administrator, as someone who's authorized to see the button will return. So you're going to do this a couple of times. You're going to place something on the screen, hide it for everyone except one user. I hid it for everyone except the VP, and then realize, wait a minute, I'm not a VP, but I am the admin. I better bring that button back so I can work with it. And you simply do that by going back into table management. So let's review what we've done. We started by building our house, at least the rough design of our house. Here's our house. Here's all the rooms: a payables room, a bank deposits room, receivables, payroll, and all the other modules. We talk about modules. Modules are tables. Rooms are an analogy for tables within the database. Step 1, we laid out all the tables, and we put into those tables the bare minimum fields necessary to establish our security. We then used a template. You can use this one or any one, but we had some document drawn up that clearly specifies at the most granular level the name of a user, the role of a user, the rights of those users, and the privileges of those users. And then we noted the exceptions on a user-by-user basis. So everyone who's a clerk might have the exact same rights, the exact same privileges, and they'll have the exact same exclusions. Step 3, we went in and applied that model in the template that I just put away. We went in and applied it, first of all, using the Security tab as the system administrator to define database level rights. Then we went in and we established table level rights. Who could see the payroll table and who can't? Who can read it, write to it, create new records within it, delete existing records within it. If you have no privileges, by default, you won't even have the right to see it. That all happened at the table level. Then we went into the field level, one field at a time, for the salary, federal, state, and local tax, and net pay fields. We established the privilege, the ability, the right to see or not see the field. Now, we could say that the manager can see the field, but can only read it. They can't edit it. In this case, we just said, if you're not the VP and you're not the admin, you can't see it. We could have gone in and say, the VP can see it, the admin can see it, the manager can see it, but only the VP and the admin can edit it. So you can get very, very particular rights and privileges. The ability to see something is the right. The ability to interact with something is the privilege, even though everyone has all of the privileges to this one field. Only certain people, VP and admins, can even see it. So by default, if you can't see it, you can't exercise any of your privileges anyway. Let's take a next step. Let's look again at our payables and receivables module. I'm going to take the VP, the manager, and the clerk all back to their desktop. Let's look at payables and receivables, which are the only two tables that everybody, clerks, managers, and VPs, the only two tables that everybody can see. Let's look at what they look like to the different users. Now remember a moment ago, we established field level security in the payroll table. There were 10 fields. 5 of those fields were related to how much people make. And those 5 fields were only available to the VP. We did that one field at a time. Let me show you another way to define role-based security at the field level, but for multiple fields, all with one step. Let's look at accounts payable the way a clerk sees it. The clerk can see the vendor invoice number, the amount due, and the GL account that this transaction will post to. All they can see is these 3 fields on this one tab. Compare that to the accounting manager. Same table, payables, same record, same 3 fields, but now there's a second tab. The invoice payment disbursement tab also tells us when the invoice was paid. Compare that to the VP. Same table, payables, same record, same first page, same 2 tabs, but the VP can also see the bank deposit for the payment that was made. The clerk doesn't even know there's a second tab. The clerk then becomes a manager. Now the manager has this second tab that shows one piece of payment information. When you become a VP, now you have access to the cash management or banking module, so this field becomes available. How did we do this? We did it by employing a second tab. Let us once again return to our role as the system administrator, back to our desktop with the administrative wrench in hand. We did this exactly the same way in the payables and the receivables table. Here's receivables. There are 2 tabs in receivables, 2 fields on the second tab. Let's see how we were able to manipulate fields in mass. Let's go into our payables table, into table management, and here we see we have added a layout element. We've added a tab as an object within this table. As we know, anything, any object, a field, a formula, a space, a button, a view, a chart, no matter what it is, anything that follows a tab is only visible on that tab. So here we see we have 5 fields: invoice number, invoice amount, posting account, date of payment, bank date, and the bank deposit slip ID number. 5 fields. 3 of them appear on the first page or the first tab. 2 of them appear on the second page or the second tab. By hiding the entire tab, we hid everything on that tab. Remember, the greatest form of security is invisibility. You cannot steal, damage, or without permission interact with something that you don't even know exists. You can't even see it. You can't find it. By making this tab display only if the user role is not the clerk. The manager can see it, the administrator can see it, the VP can see it, everybody can see it except the clerk. So when I'm logged in as the clerk, my payables and my receivables screen look like this. 1 tab, 3 fields. I can't print and I can't delete, noting the icons in the top right-hand corner, because at the database level, I was not given those rights. This, to me, is everything that exists in the room that is payables or the room that is receivables. Compare that to the manager, who can see there's a little room off to the side. There's another part of this room, but I can only see this one field on that extra part, that second tab. By making tabs, and once again, I'm the administrator now, by making tabs visible or invisible, by default, everything on the tab becomes visible or invisible. And since this tab is only visible to everyone who is not the clerk, by default, these 2 fields are invisible to the clerk as well. Now, if you can see the tab, which we know the manager and the VP can do, then we get field specific. The date field is always available. There's no parameter, there's no code that makes it visible or invisible, and it can be read and edited by anyone who can see it, and everyone can see it if you can see this tab. Since the clerk can't see the tab, the clerk can't see what's on the tab. The bank deposit, the cash management field, that's a little different. That is only visible to the VP or the admin. So even though the manager can see the tab, the manager only sees the one field on the tab. The VP sees the other one. Using tabs, and I'm going to go back and now be the administrator again. I'm back in the table management screen for the payables table as the system administrator. By using tabs, we can put dozens or hundreds of fields on one tab, and then just make the whole tab invisible to certain roles. And that will make those dozens or hundreds of fields instantly visible or invisible based on the rights and privileges that role has to the tab. Now, if multiple people can access the tab, like the manager and the VP, then you might have to do some field-specific logic for what they can see within the tab. But don't forget, these tabs are very powerful objects. They are layout elements that allow us to give visibility or invisibility, to apply role-based security to entire blocks, entire groups of fields, formulas, buttons, headers, any object, any element that we can put into a table. We have now done everything except the most important thing. We have to define the users and the roles to begin with. We've told the tables and the database that there are different roles, There are VPs and clerks and managers, and you can have as many roles as you want. But we haven't actually said who is the VP, who is a manager, who is a clerk. We haven't defined the individual users that will receive these rights and privileges. Let's now do that. This can only be done by the system administrator. You got to be the administrator. You got to have wrench rights to your database. And you have to get out of the database by going to the desktop and finally leaving and going all the way back to the cloud team room, which we see here. Here is my one database in my one team, the role-based security team. And here are all of my members. As an administrator, I can invite new members. And when I invite a member to the team, a member is an individual named user. When I invite a member to the team, by clicking this button, I define their email. This establishes their existence as a unique person, as a unique user. And I define their role. For example, I may define a new role called not just clerk, but I might define a new role by creating a new role that says payroll clerk. A payroll clerk is differentiated from a payables or a receivables clerk. For a role to exist, there must be a user who has been invited into that role. Joe at nioxis.com has been invited to join this team as a payroll clerk. If I go to invite another person, Greg at nioxis.com, and I want to assign him rights, I can make him a payroll clerk also. But watch what happens. I'm going to cancel out on Greg, and I'm going to cancel the invitation to Joe. We now have nobody, no user, has been assigned to the role of payroll clerk. So when I invite the next person, there is no role called payroll clerk. I have to create it again. We must define users who will be adopting that role. And that is how we define the roles and the users who adopt those identities within Ninox. You will note that in this database, I now have a parameter that I can refer to. If I go into the payroll module, back into table management, there is a parameter called capital V, capital P. This parameter exists because here on the cloud team, there is a user who has the role capital V, capital P. The owner has the role ADMIN, all lowercase admin. Manager, MGR, clerk, capital C, lowercase LERK. The names that appear here are the names and the exact spellings and the proper capitalization of the roles in our system. And that's all there is to it. Thank you for joining me here at the Ninox Learning Channel. Thank you for supporting Ninox and everything we do here at the Nioxis Corporation. And please do come back and see us next week. Bye-bye, everybody.